hopefully you've already, read the book material like I've asked, as you do before you read the lecture. But, the book talks about the sociological environment where trends, grow and where they begin and grow and fade away. And all of that is based on the, sociology of what's happening in the world. So, if we look at the evolution, right, of what women wore at the beach, you see that just changes in beliefs and understand the change in beliefs for men and women of what the how much of the woman's body should be exposed is really is evident here. So if we look at the first picture, they're really covered up in the 20s. Actually, those outfits were risque for the 20s. There actually are pictures of people way more covered up. And then we move on to the 40s and the 50s, where things became a little bit more less covered up. That's probably the best way to say it. And then the invention of the bikini, the French cut and plunging styles. And today, this final picture that I've shown is definitely a modest picture of a woman of a certain age in a bikini, right? But you can put in your head what a two-piece really looks like when you go to the beach. It ain't that picture. So I chose one that was much more modest. But the sociological environment. So we're going to dive into some of the things that specifically correspond. But fashion is a continuum, right? It is a continuum on a timeline, and everything has a starting point and an end point. And that first picture we look at is a starting point of women being able to show their bodies more. And now we're at the point where Cardi B and that WAP, right? So what we're able to do, it changes based on the sociological environment. As with the economic environment, there's always more than one component that affects an environment. So we're not going to talk about all of them in the lecture because, again, the textbook does a great job of covering them. But some of the things that affect the sociological environment are leisure and ethnic influences, the status of women. We talked about that in the first slide. We're going to talk about that again. Physical mobility and faster communication. So, leisure, right? There was a point in time where, we worked sun up to sundown, really sunrise to sunset, just in order to sustain our livelihood, right? So the invention of the 8-hour work week changed the game, and now the work at home, right, has changed the sociological environment that affects fashion. So again, working from home, some of us work 8 hours, some of us work less than 8 hours, some of us work more than 8 hours. And what does that do to our leisure time? And in effect, with having more or less leisure time, how does that affect our fashion choices, right? We live in a world environment and ethnic influences. In my history of fashion class, I talked about ancient India and the sari. And the sari is Indians are one of the few cultures, and the Chinese, in a sense too, but India specifically is one of the few cultures that is held on to their ancestral traditional form of dress. And if you think about it, saris are, while they're still seen as, in quotes, Indian garments, they are Indian garments. We see them in a much more contemporary fashion, and we see many of us wear cultural dress that is just not of our culture anymore. So those ethnic influences, and as we become more and more of a world environment, we see those ethnic influences filtering their way into the decisions and choices that we make with our fashion choices, but also with just who we do business with too, right? women love fashion. Actually, men love fashion too, but the status of women, right? And as we become freer and freer with, not as oppressed or not under the thumb, um, the status of women is really important. We're going to dive into that as deeper on a particular slide coming forward, right? Social mobility. So, the goal of the American dream is to do better than our parents. So, are we continually upwardly mobile? And as we become more upwardly mobile, what do we do with our choices? So like I said in an earlier slide is, one of the first things you do when we get some extra money, we're like, what can I buy with it, right? Or what luxury item can I get, right? So that's social mobility. And then the physical mobility, the ability to just go and do and see whatever you want to see, right? And, when you have that, physical mobility, it's a response to fashion. So, that cross pollination that happens when you travel to a different destination than where you live, and those ethnic influences of that destination, and then the ability for us to have the whole world at our hand with faster communications. The invention of the internet completely transformed our world, and it has had some short but more importantly some long-lasting sociological effects. So these things are all really important, and we're going to dive specifically into a couple of them in the next couple slides. So we're going to talk about ethnic influences and the status of women in particular. Earlier in the lecture, we looked at the population figures just of Rancho, just of the city of Rancho, of the 177 or so thousand people that work there, and looked at the breakdown by ethnicity. And like I said when I reviewed that slide, is Rancho is about in the mid 30s, Hispanic and white. But looking at the actual and projected population ethnicities going forward, we do see a shift, and this is a national number. But if we look at the projections, in 1960, the population of the U.S. was at 80. The white population, sorry, was at 85%. And then in 2005, after the census, it was at 67%. And the projection in 2050 is that it's only going to be 47%. So, and then we see the growth of Hispanic population. So, less than 4% in the 60s, and about 14, and then pretty much doubling from where it was in 2005 to 2015. We see the African American population is pretty stable, and the Asian population will be just about doubling from where it was in 2005. And if we look at this, right, we see that ethnic influences are changing. So Hispanic and Asian influences will, become more prominent, right? And just think about the things that you eat. 15 years ago, actually, no, I won't say 15, but 10 years ago, I never would have thought that I was going to eat pho, right? And it's delicious, right? So, ethnic influences are an important factor to what is happening in fashion trends, because now large urban chains, well, number one, they're not all American. They're not so American or Eurocentric, but just the rise of looking at what the influences are of different ethnicities is really important. So, for Hispanic Americans, that Spanish speaking market in the United States is growing so fast that researchers can't even keep up, and they want to capture and capture them so they can get that loyalty, right? We're going to talk about we talked about that already. They want those loyal customers, so they want to grab them now. And even though African Americans are a small percentage, we're a big culture influencer, right? So it's really important for those things to to continue to be recognized by, retailers, and apparel companies and designers. And when we're going to talk about trend forecasting, that's the career we're going to talk about. When we talk about trend forecasting, all of these things are things that trend forecasters look at when they're making their determinations and when they're making their recommendations to companies. The last sociological influence that we're going to look at is the status of women. And personal political freedoms for women are they're hard won. Sorry, I'm being nice by saying hard won. We had to fight really, really hard in order to get where we are. We still have a way to go, right? But the status of women is really important in a sociological context because what women do with their money is different than what men do with their money. So women in general do things with their money. I'm not going to say that men don't either. Psychologically, though, the studies have shown that women tend to do things that are more helpful for their family when they have discretionary income. And so the status of women is really, really important. So, really in less than a century, women have, gone from being, but completely behind the scenes. And they have been able to, there was a point in time where we couldn't own property. We couldn't vote, right? We just had the commemoration of that. The 100th commemoration of women, white women, white women getting the right to vote. Sorry, sisters didn't get it for a while. And people that are disabled didn't get it for even longer than that. That's a whole political diatribe I just went into, right? But, women hold social influence through, our charity work and volunteerism. And those are things that we are more likely to do with our money. We will do things more that will benefit the household and society as a whole. And part of that status that we've been able to garner is because of increased opportunities to attain an education. Actually, women are the most educated group by far over men in terms of college and advanced degrees. Now, if we break that down by certain occupations, that's another story. But education is one of the things that women have had huge gains in. And while we have that educational attainment, we also have been able to have some social freedoms. And if we think back to the image that I had of the women in the bikinis, right? That social freedom that we weren't able to have. I'm part of an organization that actually participated in the 1913 suffrage march in Washington, D.C. They were students at Howard University. They were female students at Howard University, and they actually had to get a chaperone. They had to have a male chaperone to go off campus with them to participate in that march. And that is, right now, I know some of the women and the men in this class are like, what, a chaperone? Like, right? So that social freedom that we're allowed to have has made us decide what to do with our choices, right? How we have a difficult time. I'm going to say as a percentage of the population, I'll speak for myself as an African American woman, as a Black identifying woman. I don't want nobody to tell me what to do with my body, right? Or, what choices I can make, or what school I can go to, or what things I can do. So the status of women really has had a major factor on the fashion world, because we also are the number one consumers of fashion. We buy for ourselves, we buy for our children, we buy for the men in our lives, dads, brothers, husbands, spouses, all of those. So the status of women is really important. And when we look at the graphic on the screen, our earnings are vastly different. So for the same job, the average earning for a white man or Asian woman, a white woman, a Black woman, and a Hispanic woman is completely different. And with all things said, this is the same job in the same company, with the same job description, but the salaries can be vastly different. We're making it to the end, right? So the last environment that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the psychological environment. And the psychological environment is just fashion interests in at any time in history, is an overarching prevailing attitude towards psychological attitudes, it just overall, right? And there are five attitudes. Sorry, there are five attitudes that influence that's fashion demand, right? And it's boredom, curiosity, reaction to convention, the need for self-assurance, and the desire for companionship. So really, I'm tired of wearing this, so let me get something new, right? It's let's see what that looks like on me, right? It's time for a change. You know, Either wanting to conform to a group, and it doesn't matter if that group is a non-conforming group, but wanting to conform to a group, right? The need for us to get over feelings of inferiority by how we dress. So sometimes we may fulfill a need by making fashion choices. So if we want the perception that we're more successful than we really are, we may splurge on an extravagance or a luxury item, or only wear brands, right? Only wear brands to be able to say, I got it together, right? And then that just desire for companionship, which is a desire that we all have, right? It's an instinct for our species. So whether we're flamboyant or really subdued, though, that desire to find our people, right? To find people like us, to find our people is really, really important. And, one of the great things about this program is this is generally where the fashion people find their people, right? So business folks or mathematicians, well, maybe not, because they find their people too, but we really find our people, right, in part by looking at what they have on when they walk in class or on the discussion board, like what pictures they're posting on the discussion board. So that psychological element is the last part of the environment that we're going to talk about. So we're at the end of this portion of the lecture, and again, you're probably like, Professor Johnson, this is a class about fashion careers. Why are we talking about all this other stuff, right? All this other stuff is important because all this other stuff goes into careers in fashion. So, some of the topics that we talked about were a repeat of the topics that we talked about in the first chapter when we talked about marketing, specifically marketing positions. And for this chapter, we're going to talk about trend forecasting. And trend forecasting is just the study of these things. It's a study of geographic, demographic, population, age, market, spending patterns, trend for, part of what a trend forecast is, they look at the influences and how we spend our time, what we do at that time, and the move of population shifts and attitudes and beliefs. So that is why this is really important. So I want you to digest this information. Make sure you go back and read the book if you haven't already. But the book does a great job digging really in deep with those the psychological environments. I want to make sure you have a grasp of that information. It talks more about some of the sociological environmental factors. Make sure you have a great understanding for that. And then just what market segmentation, the details of market segmentation are as well. The other thing is our textbook does a good job of putting a spotlight on the innovative people in in fashion that cover these areas. So, for this chapter, it talks about, they use Donna Karan as an example, and there is a director on Cali Carbone who's a creative director at a company in New York City, and creative director in Trend Forecaster is a similar type position. So make sure that you are reading those spotlight careers that are in the textbook. They have two things. They're called spotlight careers, and there's also spotlights on innovators. So make sure that you you put those things in your toolbox so you have an understanding of what those innovators do as well.